Welcome to the Sunday Times Politics Weekly, where we explore the big political stories of the moment. I'm Mike Siluma, and thanks for joining us. This week, President Cyril Ramaphosa finally made the much-anticipated changes to his cabinet, including appointing Paul Mashatile as his deputy president. What do we have then? A more effective and efficient cabinet, or simply a shifting of the deck chairs on the ship? Joining us for this episode of the Politics Weekly is Professor William Gumede, Associate Professor at the School of Governance and a previous guest on this show.
With immediate effect.
When people zone.
And I quote, in 2 years' time, Eskom's problems will be a thing of the past. People won't even remember load shedding. Unquote.
They put saliva on the paper.
I'm in charge. That's why these fools are running around here. I'm in charge.
And then they share that zone.
Point of order, Chairperson. Point of order. The ruling party by point of order
Must step aside within 30 days.
No, I'm not going to apologize.
He has no brains whatsoever.
So the ANC president was sabotaged again yesterday?
Well, sabotage, that can be
This is not a Shakespeare.
Can you please come in?
Welcome to the show, Prof. Why do we need a cabinet of this size? Why so many deputy ministers? It just felt to me like we're loading the cabinet with deputy ministers. Do ministers need to have, some of them have got 2 deputy ministers?
Thank you for having me on the program. And again, it's such a joy to have the discussion with you. I think the first, just to start off, just to say that the cabinet is simply just too large. It's too large because it will make decision-making very slow. Coordination is going to be very, very difficult. In fact, it is going to undermine efficiency and undermine performance. I mean, if you look, since the Second World War in developing countries, they've done very well in terms of execution. Normally, they would have cabinets of between 12 people and sort of maximum 20. If you think about the great big growth years of Japan, Singapore, and South Korea after the Second World War, they've done that with very, very few or small cabinets, but cabinets of quality. So you get quality people, you get your top people in the country, top skill sets, and then you have a smaller cabinet. So in our case, what will happen now, unfortunately, I think there's going to be a lot of duplication as it has been in the past. Now, the trick is, I think, what President Ramaphosa and also other presidents have tried to do, ANC president, instead of taking out, some of your really incompetent cabinet ministers, they actually move them around, and then they bring in dead wood of, from the opposing faction in order to create unity in government in the ANC. And then they then add to that, new people that they hope are going to deliver. Now, instead, what then happens is actually now just a duplication, and you don't get the delivery.
I'm going to try and connect the changes to the challenges which are facing the country, to try and marry or correlate, if we can. I don't know if the president does try to do that when he's thinking about changing his cabinet or appointing people to cabinet. From where you're sitting, what would you say are the critical challenges facing the country? Maybe 3 of the most pressing ones, would you say?
Energy is, top of the agenda. Our economy is top of the agenda, but our trade also, very high. And then police. If you look at, these critical areas, one would have expected the president use this opportunity to bring in some change in these, in these critical areas. But we haven't seen that. And, there was actually a great opportunity for the president because the president can make 2 appointments at ministerial level where people are not members of parliament. So he could have used these critical areas to appoint, people from outside, people with a kind of real industrial skills to come in and who have no connections with the ANC, no connections with the patronage system, and actually deliver in a crisis mode, deliver the public services. For example, he could have brought in someone specifically to deal with the police, for example, because, that's a critical issue. Lack of rule of law in the country makes investment impossible, makes employment creation impossible. He could have done the same with someone in education, bring in a specialist education person who's not linked to the patronage factions of the ANC to try to turn around public education. So really it's been a missed opportunity. And also what the president could have done is also bring in, I know, the sad thing is about the ANC is it's, unfortunately on its backbenchers, his members of parliament, they're very, very, the talent is very thin. So there's not many people that he could have brought in to strengthen his cabinet. But he could have searched harder to find people in the ANC's backbenchers and bring them in, to turn around these critical areas.
Are we not perhaps on parallel universes with the president, that we may have expected that he will put together a new cabinet that addresses at least most of the problems, that the country is facing, when in fact he is addressing a completely different set of problems, which have got nothing to do with the country?
I mean, sadly, the president did not reshuffle his cabinet to deal with the critical challenges that the country is facing, but he put together a cabinet really to tackle, to unify the ANC and to build, his constituency within the ANC and to please the ANC. And for me, that is a heartbreaking thing. Because by trying to satisfy the ANC, by reshuffling to make the ANC factions happy, he then undermines, the ability of the country, the economy and governments to deal with the critical issues. I mean, if one look at the appointments that he have made, essentially what he tried to do was to include some of the popular leaders elected at the ANC's national elective conference in December, those who made it to the top of the NEC. And then what he tried to do is retain some of his core supporters, some of the people that helped him to be re-elected, like Gwede, Mantashe, the Mineral Resources and Energy Minister. And then he also tried to retain some of his opponents in order, to construct a sense of unity in the top structure of the ANC. Now, we've seen the last couple of years, the focus on unifying the ANC has actually undermined the country, the economy, and the political stability of the country.
I was surprised, just observing the president speak, that and even the content of the announcement, because he actually started with a disclaimer that this is not an overhaul of cabinet, And from then on, it seemed to me, it suggested to me that he does not act like a man who recognizes we're in crisis. He says, no, the cabinet configuration will be addressed at some point further down the line.
No, absolutely. The expectations were so high at this cabinet, and particularly because the president delayed it for such a long time, because he was consulting all of the factions of the ANC to try to make certain that he pleased every faction, and he brought every representative from every faction into this cabinet. So clearly, what he said, really, that the president and the ANC leadership have not really read the room of South Africa. They've removed, they live in a bubble, not understanding, the real suffering of people and the sense of hopelessness and the expectations from people. So I think, this reshuffling could have, because the reshuffling is focused on unity and really unity for the ANC ahead of next year's election. So essentially, President Ramaphosa has tried to build unity to try to unify the ANC ahead of the national election campaign next year. But what he would do really is, I think it has disappointed people to such an extent, and ordinary people have been hopeful that this cabinet will actually be the moment, I think, where the ANC actually lost power. So when we look back after next year's national elections and the ANC dropped below 50%, I think we will look back at this moment of this reshuffling for unity of the ANC and not a reshuffling for the unity of the country and the interests of the country as the moment where people gave up totally on the ANC.
Yeah, the expectation after December, after the conference, looking at Cyril Ramaphosa's position, relatively strengthened, more strengthened position as leader of the ANC. A lot of people were saying, okay, now this is the time when he's going to show us what stuff he's made of. And, basically to try to shape both the ANC and government in his, to his liking, and basically deliver on his initial promises, of fixing the state, fixing the country, fixing the economy, fighting corruption, etc. And that he would appoint people who would be tasked with doing exactly that, and without kowtowing to the different factions in the party.
The president's strategists and advisors and some of his supporters have been saying the last couple of years that the reason why the president has been so lackluster and so indecisive has been that he, at the previous national conference in 2017, that he got a narrow victory and he didn't feel confident and he needed to consolidate his power. And I think after his really big victory now, the December 2022 national conference, there was obviously expectations. Well, now that the president has been re-elected as president of the ANC with a really big margin, that now he will assert himself and he will assert his authority and he will do all of the things that society wants him to do. He will introduce the reforms, and I think the moment for him was a day or so after he was re-elected as ANC president, he sort of announced a new cabinet, a reinvigorated cabinet, new energized people. That was the moment, because normally when you get re-elected, either at a party or at the national elections, that is normally where presidents are at their strongest, and that is when they should make their critical appointments. Now, I think he didn't do that. He delayed it because he wanted to consult all of these different factions and structures of the ANC. So what it shows about him that actually, the next 5 years, although he has a bigger margin of support within the ANC, he will remain as indecisive and he will remain focusing on unifying the ANC rather than introducing the shock therapy in the economy and in the country that we need. I mean, I think if you remember at the beginning of his presidency, early on, he stated that he would rather be seen as a weak president in his quest to unify the ANC. He doesn't want to see an ANC that breaks up. So even if people criticize him as a weak president, he will accept that. So I think that is really what we're going to see even for the next 5 years if the ANC is still in government.
One of the debates that have come up, in the wake of the supposed or the reshuffle that didn't quite happen, is how cabinet ministers are appointed or selected for appointment. One view is that you need to appoint people to portfolios that speak to their qualifications, then their capabilities and their, maybe intellectual, ability, etc. The other is that actually being a cabinet minister or a political head, you don't have to be an expert yourself. It's a question of management, the ability to manage wherever you send. In other words, it should be possible, for example, to move a minister from one portfolio to the other without any trouble. What is your take on that?
I have a different view. I think in a developing country like our country and an emerging market economy, it is very important to, when cabinet appointments are made, that the cabinet ministers have at least the competency related to the officers that are appointed. Now, in other countries, maybe, you don't, in industrial countries, maybe you wouldn't need such a requirement because the public services in those countries are so strong and so competent and based on merit. But in our case, where appointments to cabinet is not necessarily made on merit, but really to the political cadre system, it then becomes important to get, cadres, political cadres that are appointed as cabinet ministers to have at least some kind of competency as close as possible to the departments that they are appointed to.
So you would not have appointed Sindisiwe Chikunga, for example, to transport, because she's very highly qualified, but her qualifications are in the medical field or in the healthcare field.
Absolutely. Just think about it. These critical areas, infrastructure, including transport. So we need quick turnarounds there because it's infrastructure and transport is so critical to our economy, so critical to the turnaround. So you really want to appoint somebody there that at least have some kind of technical skill set within the infrastructure system, who at least is an engineer or something related to that, or somebody who has headed some transport related organization or entity, and so on. It's like, if you think about it, the appointment in the past of chairperson of ESCOM, Professor Ramokgopa was a medical doctor, in a critical area where you want to have, the country needs a quick turnaround. And then although he obviously is a competent person, but engineering and power was not his core competency, and he really struggled there.
Now let's go to the Minister of Electricity, which was like the kind of highlight, if you like, apart from the Deputy Presidency appointment, the highlight of the announcement, made by the President. Do you think that he will be able, that Kgosientsho Ramokgopa will be able to make a difference, or a big difference? In other words, halt or reverse or eliminate completely load shedding?
I mean, the good thing about his appointment is that he is an engineer, so he has broad competency in the area, not necessarily, obviously, on the mechanical or side. He's on the civil engineering side, so that at least is a good thing. I mean, the bad thing for him really is that one of the problems why we haven't had the turnaround at ESCOM and the turnaround in our energy policy is that there's been a duplication of oversight. We've got Minerals and Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe overseeing ESCOM, but we also have Pravin Gordhan as a Public Enterprises Minister overseeing ESCOM. So there's been duplication, different views of how to take forward ESCOM. And now we're bringing in a Minister of Electricity. And unfortunately for Ramokgopa, that he is not a very senior person in the ANC, and that Gwede Mantashe, who is the national chairperson of the ANC, is almost a de facto prime minister, and he is a key individual he helped President Ramaphosa getting re-elected at the ANC's national conference. So his profile is bolstered, his power is bolstered, and so I cannot see how the new electricity minister is going to coordinate both Mantashe and Gordhan, two very strong individuals with very strong views of where to take ESCOM. Obviously, they haven't been successful so far, but they still believe that their way of doing it is still right. Both individually think so. So I think the new electricity minister may actually be marginalized and squeezed out by these two big titans of the ANC, and this may actually be, sadly for Ramokgopa, this could actually be the end, really, possibly, of his career. I think he might, I mean, if you remember, Gwede Mantashe a few months ago said, after he heard speculation about that there may be an electricity minister, he said, well, anyone who's going to be appointed will be like a project manager. And I think that really is what the new electricity minister is going to be, a project manager who's going to be pushed around by other ANC cabinet ministers.
But doesn't that then bring the role of the president into sharp focus, because he is the sponsor of the new minister, of the Minister of Electricity. So one would expect that he would provide the presidential backing to him to be able to do what he needs to do.
Because the president's style so far has been to try to please all factions, so what, in practical terms, what it has meant in cabinet is that instead of dealing with the inefficiencies like, getting for example, getting Gwede Mantashe out of the energy space because he's been proven to be inefficient. The president would rather, in such cases, appoint another person, so duplicate. So, hoping that the new appointee in a different ministry will by miracle, will now deliver and so on. So that has been his style. That is why you can see, for example, just in the president's own office, I mean, there's a lot of task teams, there are commissions, there are structures. It's almost like a parallel public service. And unfortunately, that parallel public service, even in the presidency themselves, they've been totally ineffective because the public service really delivers and performs. It's their task to do that. And if there is a parallel public service in the presidency, they'll be marginalized, and that is what has happened in the public service. So I think it will happen again now with the new electricity minister in cabinet.
Let's talk quickly before we wrap up about Paul Mashatile, the new deputy president of the country. He's 61. I think the president is pushing 70. Is he a shoe-in for next president?
I think Paul Mashatile is very likely going to be the new president of the ANC. I think it's a matter of time. So if, by the look of it, if the ANC drops below 50% in next year's national elections, I think there's going to be introspection and maybe a rebellion against the leadership of President Ramaphosa, because President Ramaphosa will then be the first ANC leader since 1994 that brought the ANC down to under 50% in a national election. And I think then Paul Mashatile is then likely going to be the shoe-in to take over. So it may be then that President Ramaphosa, in reality, based on this reshuffling, which really hasn't really strengthened his authority or his credibility within the ANC itself, that he may actually be out of power and out of the presidential leadership of the ANC after next year's national elections, and Paul Mashatile will be taking over.
I think we'll wrap it up there on the Sunday Times Politics Weekly for this week. And we'd like to thank our guest, Professor William Gumede, who's Associate Professor at the School of Governance at Wits University. We appreciate your time. I'm Mike Siluma. Until next time, do stay safe, stay blessed, and let's do good for our country.